Welcome back to my channel. Thanks for stopping by. I'm Celiara. Today's video is going to be about the French court, looking at the reign of King Louis XIV, also known as the Sun King, King Louis XV, and the 16th with Marie Antoinette going into the French Revolution. But I want to take a look at this through the lens of opera. Let's get into it. So one of the things that I find so fascinating about this time period is the style, the elegance, the over-the-top architecture, art, the ornamentation. Everything's gilded in gold, powdered wigs, the Rococo, the Baroque. And the Baroque is something of a derogatory term, actually, that was coined for this period after the fact. The term itself means irregular shaped pearl, and it's referring to this over-ornamented, gaudy, just excess that eventually leads to the unrest in the populace, French Revolution, revolt. But building up through that, it's just this fascinating period to me. Starting out, King Louis XIV, the Sun King, he had one of the longest reigns in history as an absolute monarch. Before we get into some of that, I need to go just back a little bit, give a little bit of pre-story. With the passing of his father, Louis was only 5. He wasn't able to take the throne at that point. So instead, his mother, the Queen Regent, steps in and she has a council. Well, this council is headed by cardinals from the Roman Catholic Church, of course. The church was in everything, doing everything, and was quite a power at that time all over Europe, very much involved in politics. We have Cardinal Richelieu starts out, and then that, when he passes, is passed to Cardinal Mazarin. Now, Mazarin is looked at a little bit as a villainous character by the French, the church in general, being in France, the Italian influence that it brought with them. A lot of the French people are very nationalistic and they just didn't like this. They didn't want them there. At this time, when you want to blast somebody, we don't have social media. What are you going to do? You're going to start a pamphlet campaign. Pamphlet campaign is basically almost exactly what it sounds like. We're going to write some pamphlets and we're going to pass them around in secret and get everybody, talking about this person or whatever it might be. Pamphlets could contain a variety of things. Derogatory, it would have satire, sometimes cartoon-like pictures, libellous chansons, which are little songs, and all of that. So basically these would start popping up. They would be put on, like flyers. We'd post them up places or we'd hide them in things and people would come across them, and nobody knew where they were coming from exactly, because if you traced it back to someone, of course, they're probably going to be in a lot of trouble, like imprisoned or killed, and nobody wants that. Often just done in secret. This was their way of putting somebody on blast. Well, Mazarin had a campaign against him. It caused quite a stir. Now, he passes in 1661. Unfortunately, the things that were going on when that didn't have any ill effect, and Louis was able to take the throne. And when he does, he makes a really bold choice. He decides he doesn't want a council. He's going to rule on his own. He doesn't need, he was chosen by God, of course. So Louis happens to be very paranoid, and with good reason. There are always plots and things going on, people trying to take down the monarchy. this all sort of culminates. He ends up taking and moving the court to Versailles. He has Versailles built, and he forces the court there. The lords and people that are part of, the elite, kind of to keep an eye on them, because these guys are shady. He's able to keep better control over things. Louis XIV had a very long reign, one of the longest in history. 71 years, 72 years. Of course, that started when he was 5, even though he had, the council and the Queen Regent there helping him out. It's a ridiculously long time to be a ruler. Mazarin, while a lot of people were not a fan, one of the things that he did was he introduced France to opera. He was a music lover. I'll give him credit for that. So he brings productions, Italian opera. At that time, there was no French opera. He brings Italian opera to France. It becomes a popular entertainment. People, they want to go to the theater. They want to see things that are going on. And it gains some audience there. But it was very Italian. Italian singers, Italian language, Italian music. And the French, as I said, they're very nationalistic. And so they're a little bit like, meh. You have this back and forth between, but it's Italian and we're French and we don't like things that are Italian. Along comes Jean-Baptiste Lully, and he was a very gifted musician, composer, young, knows Louis. They've performed ballet together. Ballet's huge in France. He is given a very interesting contract by the king. He is given sole ability to compose for the court. So he composes all of the secular music for the king, for the court of France. Sacred music, totally different thing, different composers for that. We're talking about sacred music in the court, and that includes the beginnings of French opera. One of the reasons that there was this argument against Italian opera was that they felt that the French language was just not suited for opera. Well, along comes Lully, and he starts writing in a little bit of a different style for the French voice. Lully has a librettist, Philippe Quinault. And what a librettist does is they're in charge generally of the text, the prose that's used for the opera. They choose the plots. They work with the composer. Composer writes the music. And it's this partnership that they have. And a lot of composers use the same librettist for several of their works. Not always the same one, but you'll find that that partnership, when it works, it works. And they sort of stick with that. One of the elements that you will find that is common at this time in opera, whether it be from Italian or France, is that they're going to be using themes, Greek and Roman mythologies. There's a prologue. The characters are either singing the praises of the king, speaking of him as a great hero, or depicting the king himself as a great hero. Prologues really have nothing to do with the rest of the opera. They're sort of a separate entity, and their function strictly is to praise and glorify King Louis. So some examples of this, you have Cadmus and Hermione.
Par l'éclat d'un pompeux sacrifice que je me plais à voir mes soins récompensés pour prix de mes travaux ce me doit être assez que chacun en jouisse.
Another thing you'll see is there will be direct references to military victories or military campaigns that are going on. In Alceste, the nymphs are longing for the return of their hero. In Attis, there's a direct reference to an event where the French are waiting to invade the Netherlands. There's another example where you have Apollo and his muses and Neptune and his tritons. They're singing about a naval victory that references the Franco-Dutch War. Then we get a really interesting example of the plots reflecting things going on at that time in the court in an ironic sort of way. So we have the opera Isis. And when Quinault chose this plot, I'm sure he was either just not thinking it through, or this wasn't a situation in which was anything that he would have known was going to happen. So in this plot, first of all, you have Jupiter, you have Juno, and a nymph named Io. Now, Jupiter, depicting Zeus, and Juno, Hera. If you know anything about your Greek mythology, well, you can put 2 and 2 together. Jupiter is messing around with Io and being unfaithful, and Juno finds out and she's furious. She kidnaps Io. She's torturing her. Io cries out for aid. Jupiter shows up and pleads with Juno, saying, I'll do anything. I'll be faithful. Please let her go. Well, Juno lets her go and turns her into the Egyptian god Isis. So that's the plot that's going on. Well, simultaneously, there is an event occurring within the court. So you have the king. Now, the king is married, although that marriage being one of state and all of that is not going, he has an official mistress. So Madame de Montespan is his official mistress at the court, and apparently he has wandering eye as well and has noticed this other lady in the court. Well, the rumor mill gets going, and there were whispers and things where people were starting to refer, because of this opera that they had seen, they start referring to the new girl as Io. And it's quite a scandal. Montespan is furious, and she asked for Quinault, the librettist, to be kicked out of court. Fortunately for Quinault, that doesn't actually come to fruition. He doesn't get kicked out of court because Montespan comes under fire. She's named during an investigation, the Chambre Ardente, something we will talk about again later in this series, that she has been accused of conspiring against the king, plots of poison with La Voisin, witchcraft, and she gets the boot. She's lucky she just got the boot and not. She's no longer in court, and the king now has a new official mistress, Madame de Maintenon. She's a little more pious, and she has sort of an influence on the king. And so now we're going to see a little bit of a shift in the plots of the operas that reflect this. One of the things we see is because of this religious influence now, we start to see Lully composing a little bit more. He does actually compose a De Profundis. And then the themes slightly alter. So we get our first depiction of an opera based on the theme of chivalry. Now we're still going to see things that are speaking to the king's glory. We start to see the prologues now having a little bit more to do with the plot. We're getting a little bit more connection going on there. There's a little bit more of a serious nature in these operas. We're seeing a little bit less of the comedic servants and carefree, frivolous love. That's sort of reflecting a change in the king's view. So his taste changes, and so you see this reflected then in the operas that are being presented. That's where I'm going to sort of wrap this one up. Then we get a big old span of 50 years where not a whole lot's going on, and we're going to pick up with King Louis XV. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to click like and subscribe. Hopefully you learned something in the video. If you've got anything you want to add or you have any questions, please leave those down in the comments. I'll be glad to answer those and talk with all of you. And don't forget to step in for part 2. Love y'all.